Good morning, guys. I'm going to have you watch the second part to this video. It's kind of a quick start, but good luck.
We're going to look at the third emperor of the Ming Dynasty today. If you recall, in the last episode, the Hongwu Emperor, the founder of the Ming Dynasty, carelessly created a situation when he passed away in 1398. His son, the crown prince, died in 1392. Rather than pick the next eldest son, Zhu Di, the Hongwu Emperor picks the eldest son of the deceased crown prince, and once the Hongwu Emperor passes from the scene, the grandson takes over as the Jianwen Emperor. The eldest living son of the deceased Hongwu Emperor, Zhu Di, he's not too pleased with this decision, and as we will see, he ends up usurping the throne after a 4-year civil war. So, last week we looked at the Ming founder, Zhu Yuanzhang, the Hongwu Emperor, and this week we look at his son, Zhu Di, who reigns for 22 years from 1402 to 1424, and is known as the Yongle Emperor, and also as the Chengzu Emperor, or Ming Chengzu. We'll refer to him in this episode as the Yongle Emperor. It's quite a story these few years when the grandson, now reigning as the Jianwen Emperor, played this deadly game with his uncle Zhu Di. The Jianwen Emperor, he wasn't bad or anything. It's said that the open rift between the two all started when Prince Zhu Di came to Nanjing to pay his respects to his recently deceased father, the Hongwu Emperor. He came with a whole armed entourage that the emperor's people saw as potentially threatening. And after all, it was no secret that the handing off of the succession like he did, the Hongwu Emperor had created this rift between the grandson, the Jianwen Emperor, and his son, the Prince of Yan, Zhu Di. Both grandson and son, they had legitimate claims, so when he shows up at the palace with all this muscle in tow, the Jianwen Emperor, he threw down the gauntlet, and the emperor had his guards bar their entry. In fact, Zhu Di was even prohibited from visiting his father's tomb. So now everything was out in the open between these two, and may the better man win. The Jianwen Emperor then began to take political measures to diminish the Prince of Yan. He abolished all these princedoms that were led by many of the sons of the deceased emperor. And this move undermined Zhu Di, who was the Prince of Yan. Yan was the area around Beijing. The Jianwen Emperor's idea was to get rid of all these princes and fill the spots with his loyal generals. So Zhu Di is basically outgunned, outmanned, and he retreats to regroup. So he assembles enough generals and loyal supporters to make his move. And then in January 1402, he's strong enough, he marches on Nanjing, and to make a long story short, he takes Nanjing, and the imperial palace goes down in flames along with the Jianwen Emperor. Or did it? They never found his body or that of his empress, who perished together with him. So our hero, Zhu Di, 42 years old, he takes the throne, and after finally getting the chance to pay his respects before his father's tomb, he declares himself emperor, and the Yongle era begins. He had a lot of mopping up to do. China was not in very good shape. Remember, the last years of Hongwu saw all kinds of rebellion and unrest, and the Jianwen Emperor, for his 4 years on the throne, he was too busy sparring with his uncle Zhu Di, so he couldn't get the Ming house in order either. The Yongle Emperor went above and beyond the call of duty to root out all Jianwen Emperor loyalists, and there were quite a few. The Yongle Emperor, he did a little revision to the history of his time. He went and had all references to the Jianwen Emperor taken out of the record and destroyed. All official trace of his 4 years on the throne were sanitized as if the whole thing never happened. And to account for those 4 years when the Yongle Emperor did not reign, the reign of the deceased Hongwu Emperor, his father, was increased by 4 years, so that on paper, at least, the Yongle era was the successor to the Hongwu era. And so things began for this emperor with this little instance of lèse-majesté. The third Ming emperor, he reigned for 22 years, from 1402 to 1424. He's known for his expansionist activity, sponsoring the voyages of Admiral Zheng He, his 5 campaigns against the Mongols that he led personally, and for being a strong, hands-on monarch who exuded strength and confidence. His obsessions included expansion into Mongolia, Manchuria, and southward into Vietnam, as well as a lusting for prestige amongst his Asian neighbors, particularly those from Southeast Asia and all the coastal kingdoms that rimmed the Indian Ocean. He instituted a very extravagant tributary system, and in fact, Zheng He's voyages and this whole passion the emperor had for this tributary system were both interrelated. He moved the imperial capital from his father's beloved Nanjing to the site of the former Yuan dynasty capital of Dadu, which had been renamed Beiping, and now the Yongle emperor renamed this city Beijing. Bei, the third tone, means north, and Jing, first tone, means capital, and Nan, second tone, means south. So Nanjing, southern capital, Beijing, northern capital. And if you look at the kanji for the city of Tokyo, the Japanese pronounce it Tokyo, but in Mandarin these characters are pronounced Dongjing, first tone, first tone. Dong means east, so Dongjing means eastern capital, which the Japanese pronounce Tokyo. He had a lot of reconstruction to do, and the Yongle emperor immediately set about creating a dream team of scholars of the Confucian tradition, of course. His father hadn't left things in the best state, and the 4-year civil war didn't help. If there was one thing you could say about this emperor, he really took the words carpe diem to heart. Not a minute of his day was ever wasted. He was a tireless ruler, administrator, and as I said, he led armies into battle as emperor. As a builder of public works, Yongle definitely earned his stripes. He carried out massive reconstruction to the severely degraded Grand Canal. Remember, the Grand Canal, which ran from Beijing south to Hangzhou, was built during the Sui dynasty during the reign of the father-son emperors Wendi and Yangdi. One more trophy in the Yongle Emperor's Hall of Fame would be the Forbidden City. He was the one who championed the whole idea of creating an all-inclusive city within a city where the emperor and his family could live, work, and play, and the entire administration of the Ming Empire could be centrally managed. He equally supported all three of the great religions of China, Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. He was also a supporter of Islam, and there were 2 mosques built in China during his reign in Nanjing and Xi'an that still stand to this day. In 1403, the emperor announced he was going to send a fleet of ships to the countries of the Western Ocean. To accomplish such a task on a scale to match the Yongle emperor's ego, a massive shipbuilding operation was set up on the Qinhuai River where it meets the Yangtze at Nanjing, and this became the shipbuilding center of China. And China, at least during the time of this emperor, sailed the most preeminent fleet in the world. Now let's look at the man that the emperor puts in charge of this project, which was massively expensive. Its whole raison d'etre was to blow the people away who were in China's orbit. This basically included the peoples of Southeast Asia, Persia, the Middle East, and Central Asia, as well as the civilizations of India and the east coast of Africa. The Yongle emperor wanted to bring the might and the cultural superiority and everything that was great about China to all these far-flung places. The desired outcome for every mission was to get these kingdoms, states, or whatever to agree to sign on and pay tribute to the Ming emperor. And they would become like vassal states and participate in this annual tribute system where they would prostrate themselves before the Ming emperor once a year and bring gifts, and then they would be showered with many, many more gifts than what they themselves had presented. This was all part of the ritual. Of course, China being the big brother in these relationships, they had to shower these tribute-bearing missions with much more than what they would offer to the emperor. So anyway, Zheng He, he was born Ma He in 1371. In total, there were 7 voyages, 6 of them ordered by Yongle, and a 7th ordered by the Xuande emperor, a successor to Yongle, who passed in 1424. Actually, there was the brief reign of the Hongxi emperor, who put an end to the voyages, but he only lasted a year, and when the Xuande emperor took over, he called for a 7th and final voyage, and it was during this voyage that Zheng He died and was buried at sea. But it was the Yongle emperor who is credited with being the force behind these great voyages. 6 of the voyages occurred between 1405 and 1421, and the last one, under Xuande, was in 1431. Now, not only was this a mission to fly the flag, show off China's superiority, and bring in tribute missions, it was also a manhunt for the Jianwen emperor, who was probably killed in the fire that burned down the palace, but as I said, his body was never found, and the Yongle emperor always had this nagging obsession that maybe he was still alive and perhaps living in exile, gathering his strength to come back and claim the throne. So, besides wowing the peoples of Southeast Asia, India, Arabia, Africa, Zheng He was also on these voyages, keeping his eyes open for any trace of the possibly escaped Jianwen emperor. The first voyage took Admiral Zheng He's fleet to Vietnam and then on to Java, Malaysia, the Maldives, and the east coast of India, from Calcutta down to the east coast in Kerala state, and to Ceylon, which of course is now called Sri Lanka. This area was known as the Western Ocean. Today we know it as the Indian Ocean. The second and third voyages were about the same as far as what ports were called at. On the fourth, fifth, and sixth voyages, the fleet went as far as Aden and the Straits of Hormuz, Yemen, Somalia, Kenya, and other East African cities. He sailed in a variety of different kinds of ships. Most legendary and spectacular of these vessels were the so-called treasure ships, or baochuan. None survive today, and there is no solid, irrefutable evidence of their size and construction. What has come down to us are descriptions of them, and from what we know at least, these ships were 450 feet long and about 180 feet wide. This would make them the largest ships by far of their time, more than twice as long as the largest 16th century European ships. Zheng He's massive treasure ships had 9 masts and 4 decks that could hold 500 passengers, crew, with plenty of space to hold cargo. Other than all this amazing prestige China received from these kingdoms who came in contact with these fleets, it didn't lead to any significant income into China, and it never led to any territorial expansion, though that was never the purpose of these 7 voyages. And that was it. China closed the door right at the very, very moment in history when the age of exploration was just about to take off big time. And as China lay dormant and looking inward, England, Holland, Portugal, Spain, France, they all took to the seas and built these trading empires on multiple continents. There's one other interesting thing about the reign of the Yongle Emperor, and this was his attempts to invade, conquer, and hold on to Vietnam. The parallels between China's experience during the 2 decades from 1407 to 1427 and America's experience in the 1960s. A lot of striking similarities. So while the Yongle Emperor was busy doing all these other big projects, like fighting the Mongols and rebuilding the country's infrastructure, improving the administration, sending Zheng He out on these voyages, he also spent pretty much his entire reign dealing with Vietnam. The Li dynasty in Vietnam had an uneasy relationship with China. They fought with the Song to a truce, and there was relative peace. But after the Ming came to power, Vietnam, or Dai Viet as it was called, with Champa down in the south, they felt enough was enough, and they stopped kowtowing to the Chinese. So, to make a long story short, there was a diplomatic incident, and Yongle sends 215,000 troops to invade Vietnam. In 1407, the Ming are victorious, and Annam is annexed to China and renamed Jiaozhi province. But not for long. All it took was a little popular unrest and some heavenly inspiration from the Trung sisters for the Vietnamese to rise up against their Chinese masters or oppressors. The Yongle Emperor, he died on August 12th, 1424, during one of his military campaigns, this one in the north against the Tatars. He died in what is today Inner Mongolia and was brought back to Beijing, where he had just moved to 3 years earlier after spending 10 years building the Forbidden City and this whole new capital. So next time you see a picture of the Forbidden City, think of this emperor, Yongle.